So, with less than 60 days to go for the United States presidential elections, we've had an intensifying competition between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris to decide who wins the race for the White House. There has been just this morning a development with a second assassination attempt on Donald Trump, highlighting increased political polarization in America. This is, of course, an election that, as with any other presidential election when it comes to the United States, has ramifications and impacts for India, given how important America has become to India's foreign policy. So, joining us to discuss that is Professor Vineet Prakash at JNU, at the School of International Studies at JNU. Professor Prakash, thank you so much for joining us. Could you begin by telling us a little bit about how you are seeing the presidential election cycle? Any takeaways that you think are relevant for India in terms of what the two candidates have been debating, as well as what policies they've been advocating for? Something that you think New Delhi would be well advised to pay attention to.
This is a very unique election in the sense that one of the candidates dropped out so late in the race. So earlier, last time it happened was in 1968. And even then, the candidate, Lyndon Johnson, he dropped out in March. So the other candidate, Harris, is getting a really short window to campaign. So that is something very unique about this election. Secondly, we have a woman candidate as a candidate of one of the major parties. So that is again something which is very unique and interesting. And what makes it even more interesting is that we have a person of color. So the last time it happened was in 1980s, but that was an independent candidate. For the first time, we have a woman of color as a candidate of a major party. So as you know, there are only two parties which dominate the election scene over there. So for the first time, we have a woman, and that too a woman of color, of a mixed descent, Indian and African descent, who is contesting. So all these things make this election a very unique and unprecedented. And what adds to the twist is the assassination attempt which took place on Donald Trump a couple of weeks back, and the last one which took place yesterday night. So that is also something which has not happened earlier. So, and the most remarkable thing is that he survived. So, thankfully, he survived. Otherwise, it would have been a really changed race. So, how this is going to impact the results of the election taking place in November 5, that is something which remains to be seen. And whether America is ready to elect a woman president, that too a woman of color, that also remains to be seen. So the last time it happened was in 2016 when Clinton was contesting, and she was not able to pass the mark.
So, Professor, if I could ask you a little bit about what we've been seeing, let's just start with Donald Trump in terms of some of the policy proposals he's come up with. He's talking about a massive new tariff on all imports coming into America. We know that key members of his administration in the past have seen India as a country that has its tariffs too high, that needs to be punished somewhat economically. There have been questions about whether his administration is really willing to transfer the kind of defense technology that India wants. Could I ask you to sort of lay out how Donald Trump sees India, how we fit into his sort of worldview, and what policies he has advocated that may interest India or may concern India? Could I ask you to start with that?
So, if we want to understand this, we need to look into where Donald Trump is coming from. So, in US as well as in other Western countries, there has been a backlash against globalization because the working class feels that their jobs, they are going out to countries like India and China, for example. And it's a reality in the sense that most of the manufacturing jobs in USA, for example, they've gone to countries like Mexico, India, China, which is China is emerged as the factory of the world. Almost all major US companies are having manufacturing facilities in China. There's not a single company which manufactures television in United States today. Now, what has happened, the workers who are working in these companies who lost their jobs, they were earlier Democratic voters, and Donald Trump tapped into this discontented lot of voters, and he was able to succeed in becoming the president in 2016 as a result of riding the wave of this discontent. So his political genius lies in understanding this discontent in the American working class and using it to his advantage. Now, the issue of tariff, which he's talking about, is directly related to this. He says that I will raise tariffs on goods. For example, I'll raise tariffs on cars coming from Japan, or cars coming, or goods coming from China. So this would lead to more manufacturing. That is the logic which he is giving. So it would lead to more manufacturing jobs in the United States. Now, sadly, this is not how it happens. So the moment you import tariffs, other countries will also import tariffs. So your exports would go down. And the strength of the US economy lies in a free trading system. So on the one hand, where jobs in the manufacturing sector have gone down, economy in US has grown in other directions. For example, technology and such companies which are doing sophisticated work. For example, Apple, Google, all these high-tech companies. So the growth has taken place in these areas, and people who are working in these sectors, they have benefited. US economy has expanded. The problem lies with the working class blue collar voters who have lost out. So Donald Trump, by saying that he's going to increase tariffs on China, he's basically pandering to this section, which is a key voting class for his Republican Party as of now.
Right. Could I also say that, but he has also talked about raising slapping tariffs on all imports into the United States, which of course I think would also impact India. So if I could ask you to talk about that. Yeah. So
India also, one of the biggest trading partners of India is United States. So it is going to impact India if and when that happens. And the only thing which I would like to point out is that it is going to be counterproductive for both countries, because suppose tariffs are imposed on goods which are coming from India. So the American consumer who is getting those goods at a cheap cost, he'll have to pay more. So that would lead to inflation. It is not going to help in reviving the US manufacturing sector. So that is one thing. I mean, it's easy to simplify things. The genius of Donald Trump lies in simplifying things to such an extent that it appears very simple and easy. And it's a good thing politically, it is able to get votes for him, but it is not going to solve the problems of the working class of United States.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And yes, definitely it will have a negative impact on countries like India, for whom US is a major market of exports.
Right. Could I ask you also a little bit about some of the questions about the Ukraine war? We know that in the past, there has been some tension between India and its partners in Europe, as well as with the United States, on India's fairly balanced or nuanced position on the conflict in Ukraine. Donald Trump, during his recent presidential debate with Kamala Harris, did not categorically say that he wants Ukraine to win the war. He said, look, we need a deal. So there is a lot of speculation that he may, in fact, then push Ukraine for a deal and say, look, you will not take American support for granted. You guys need to push for a deal. We're not interested in supporting you beyond a point. How do you think Trump's Ukraine policy will impact India? Do you think that it will eliminate a source of tension between India and the West by saying that, look, essentially Ukraine and the Russians need to sit around the table and deal with this problem, which India can get on board with? Do you think that's fair? Or do you think that's a fair assessment of the situation?
It's difficult to say as of now, but the way war is going on in Ukraine, so Russia has its own interests to pursue in Ukraine, and so has Europe, for example, the West European countries, and now the East European countries also. So they are threatened by Russian expansion towards the West. So that is one thing which needs to be figured, and how the two candidates look at this Russian expansion westward. Now, according to Donald Trump, or in his worldview, why should America pay for defending Europe? So that is his worldview. And why these countries don't pay for their own defenses. If Russia is going to attack them, then they should be ready to spend more money to build up their armies and defenses and protect themselves. And coming from a business background, his approach is very transactional. What I am going to get, or what America is going to get out of defending Europe. Now, if we look historically, Western Europe has been one of the bases of American growth in the past, and Western Europe, culturally also, US and Western Europe are deeply connected, and most of the current population of United States is of West European origin. And in terms of trade and other ties also, there's a very deep connect between these two. And Western Europe during the Cold War was key bulwark against Soviet expansion, right, in the Cold War. So if we look at that background, then West Europe is important for American security. West Europe is important for American economy. But Donald Trump does not see it that way. He says, I mean, why we should, again, it's about simplifying things to such an extent that they become absurd. So he does not believe value in alliances which America currently has in with European countries like NATO, for example, and he feels that it's a waste of money, and these countries should start paying up more.
Right. So, but if I may ask you more specifically, then, because this has been a point of tension between India, if he, for example, pushes Ukraine to negotiate, does that fall more in line with India's position, which is that no solutions to be found on the battlefield? The two sides have to sit together and have a conversation with Russia and Ukraine on the table. Do you think that
for India, it's a tricky situation? India can't speak out very openly on the issue because they don't want to antagonize Russians. We are still dependent upon a lot on Russian imports of arms, like most of our systems are of Russian origin. So India would always adopt kind of a middle path approach in this conflict. You would never do anything which would antagonize Russians. Now, when we look at it from Trump's point of view, he would want the war to be over. And even if it means Ukraine surrendering territory to Russia, because he feels that it does not make a difference to us. But if you look at the broader picture and the historical background, then once you cede space to Russia, it is going to lead to further westward expansion, and it would lead to a threat to other countries in Western Europe, because Russia sees that NATO as an alliance has reached its borders, and they feel threatened by it, they feel insecure by it, they are definitely insecure about it, and they would not want that to happen. So historically also, Russia has always wanted to control what has been an objective of their foreign policy, like they want access to warm water ports. The northern side of Russia is all frozen. So this area, Ukraine, Crimea, it is important because it provides them access to warm water ports. So Russia has always wanted to control these areas. And if Trump comes into the picture as a president-elect, then definitely it is going to make things easy for Putin, because Trump is not going to provide the kind of support which Ukraine is getting right now from West European countries and America.
So now, if I could ask you a little bit about the questions on Kamala Harris and her candidacy. Could you just, of course, there's been some speculation that we don't know that much about her worldview. We know that there is likely to be some continuity from the Biden administration. So could I ask you, how has the Biden administration approached India? Has it been a fairly fruitful relationship while they have been in office? And do you think Kamala Harris is likely to follow, should she be elected, follow President Biden's strategy on India?
Let me put it this way. India's relationship in the last 25 years or so is based on certain shared values, common interests, and that has not changed much. So if you look at the last, say, 3 decades, for example, so almost all presidents who have come, they have tried to work upon improving the relationship with India. And same can be said about the Indian prime minister. So starting from Atal Bihari right up to Prime Minister Modi, all prime ministers have worked at building a deeper relationship because of shared values like democracy, for example, then shared interests like both countries see China as a challenge, USA as well as India, and India sees value in associating with US to counter the Chinese challenge on its northern borders. So strategic interests are now converging. That is something which has changed since the Cold War, for example. And India is no longer that cagey about working closely, although the hangover of non-alignment is still there of the Cold War period. But India is not that cagey, or at least the recent administrations, they are not that cagey about working closely with the US. Although the word ally still raises or ruffles a lot of feathers in New Delhi, but India, because of these, and then the economic interest also definitely is important. If you look closely, US-India relationship starts improving after India starts to liberalize its economy in the 90s, right? So economy is definitely a factor. And now with China becoming more and more aggressive, US sees some value in India as replacing China, not replacing China, but replacing some of the economic dependency which US has on China in terms of manufacturing capacity. So diversifying of supply chains and diversifying of manufacturing so that don't put all your eggs in the China basket. So that is the approach right now in which India can play an important role along with other countries.
Understood. And in terms of broadly the approach, though, like of Kamala Harris, do you think it is likely to follow what President Joe Biden has followed in the past?
There might be some cosmetic changes, but the crux of India-US ties is not going to change. For example, say if Donald Trump is there, then he might insist on, say, tariff reduction or opening up of markets. For example, his favorite topic was Harley Davidson, why they are not being sold in India, right? Or if Harris is there, for example, or during the past Biden administration, for example, there might be emphasis on, say, religious freedom in India or human rights in India. So those kind of things might be there, but they are more of pandering to your domestic constituency. It's not going to affect the substance of the India-US relationship.
Professor, thank you so much for joining us, for explaining what exactly is happening in the US elections, how the two leaders are likely to approach their relationship with India. Professor Prakash, thank you so much again for joining us in India Today Global.
Thank you.